blackest smoke that I've ever seen. It was floor to ceiling, wall to wall, just rolling at me.
I still see that nurse screaming out of that treatment window.
A couple of my friends from nursing school ran up and they said, Eileen, you're alive.
In the next half hour, you will meet the men and women who survived the Hartford Hospital Fire of 1961. You will hear about the lives they saved, the people they lost, and how this disaster prompted changes nationwide. This is a topic most have not touched for 50 years.
It was something that we didn't talk about, and I haven't talked about it for many years.
Across the country, 37 million Americans will be admitted into a hospital this year. Most of those patients take for granted that their hospital rooms are safe and the staff ready in case of an emergency. They take for granted that the hospital follows national fire codes. But most of those patients have no idea that those fire codes are in place because of what happened at Hartford Hospital 50 years ago.
It was a different world entirely.
Decades ago, things looked a little different. There were typically 4 patients to a room. Nurses wore white, and smoking was commonplace.
There was not any place really in the hospital where a person couldn't smoke.
Smoldering cigarette ash would ignite, causing the nation's worst hospital fire to date.
This is Dick Bertell at the scene of a multi-alarm fire at the Hartford Hospital. In front of me, as I face the front of Hartford Hospital, is a maze of fire trucks, fire hose, and firefighting equipment of all description. This is a fire confined to the 9th, 10th, and 11th floor.
December 8, 1961, 2:38 in the afternoon. A nurse on the 12th floor of Hartford Hospital would see smoke and pull a fire alarm. 3 floors below on the 9th floor, trouble was brewing. The trash chute door was weak, and in the basement of that chute, smoldering cigarette ashes were about to ignite.
I was at the time acting head nurse on the unit.
On December 8th of 1961, I was an intern on the pediatric floor.
I was a brand new nurse out on 9A, was my first floor.
My name is Bob Maher. On December 8th of 1961, I was a male aide here at Hartford Hospital.
I'm speaking from the 9th floor. I've worked my way up now to the disaster spot itself, and we have a figure of 9 persons dead here on the 9th floor of Hartford Hospital. The scene is one of water-filled halls, soaked walls, debris. There are firemen, there are priests, there are nurses, there are doctors.
By 2:40 that afternoon, an explosion forced the trash chute door from its hinges. It became a fiery missile igniting the floor. For 45 minutes, fire would rage. The devastation was total. In all, 16 people were killed, patients, visitors, nurses, and 1 physician who walked into those flames to help his patients. Their legacy is in every brick, in every hospital across the country. The Hartford Hospital Fire of 1961 changed hospital construction forever.
It was a normal day. It was just a routine day. I was working the day shift, and I went to work. And at some point that morning, I received a call to go to the 9th floor to assist with taking a patient out of bed. I went up on the elevator, got off on the 9th floor. I turned to my left to go to Center 9, and it was then that I saw the blackest cloud of smoke rolling towards me. It just filled the entire corridor, and it was rolling towards me rapidly. I turned and I ran to the north end of the building, or North 9, with this black cloud following me down the hall.
And I was standing right on the elbow of the desk, charting my medications, when it was a male aide running down the hall saying fire, and black smoke was following him.
I grabbed the fire door and unlatched it from the wall and stopped and looked back. A couple of nurses approached me at the same time, and when I looked back, I saw this black cloud now right on top of us.
And so he raced and I raced up and we shut the fire doors.
And I pushed the fire door closed.
In a short time after that, we realized how alarming it really was.
And we stood there for a moment, not knowing what was going on.
On the other side of the smoke door, fire raged, fueled by the materials that lined the ceiling and the walls. Flame retardant wasn't a priority. Wallpaper became kindling. The ceiling tiles were made of sugarcane grass, and when they fell, they created a virtual bonfire.
Slowly, we saw the fire door start to disappear. The smoke was coming around the fire door on all sides, and it didn't take long, and the fire door disappeared. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes later that I heard someone on the other side of the door, banging on the door. It was a woman, and she was screaming for help. Without even giving it a thought, I went back into the smoke. I felt along the door, and I found the door handle of the fire door. And of course, today I think about it, and I realize how stupid it was. I opened that door to go out to help, and I could feel the pressure of the door pushing on me. But I hollered for the woman to come inside. She was screaming, and she said, "I can't. I don't know where to go. I can't see." And I said, "Just come to my voice." And she didn't move. She was very close. And I opened the door some more, and I started to go around the corner to go out and get her, when I felt the heat of the flame, and it took the hair on the side of my head off, and this eyebrow and the eyelash, just a flash. And I pulled my head back and realized there was no way I was getting out there, and I didn't think I was going to get that door closed again. But I just pushed, and I pushed, I guess, with everything I had, and I got the door to lock again.
And Dr. Pertek was there, the famous surgeon, Dr. Pertek. He was one of our most respected surgeons, and he happened to be on the floor. And he and I looked at each other because he said, we heard screaming on the other side of our door, our fire door. And he said, "Miss Gormley," he said, "we have to open the doors." And so we did open them a crack, and down on the floor was the charred, unbelievably charred remains of a person who was still alive and moaning. So he and I pulled this woman into what would have been the linen closet. And I said, "Dr. Pertek, what can I do for you?" So he said, "Miss Gormley," he said, "just get me some morphine." And I did. We got some morphine, and he administered some morphine to this person, and we just kind of covered her and made him or her comfortable. Now, to this day, I'm guessing that that was a woman, but I'm not sure if that was one of the women patients.
Whenever I think about the fire, and it's been 50 years now, that's the first thought that I have. It's as clear as if it was yesterday.
People are being taken out. It appears now that perhaps all of the patients have been... No, I can see another one now moving down the hall, attended by at least 6 or 7 people coming over toward the elevator. They are working their way down the hall. It was believed at first that this fire had escaped a tragic note. but it now is a definite figure confirmed by state police. We have 9 persons dead here on the 9th floor, where the major trouble came.
See the devastation here after the fire, and to see things that you never would imagine seeing. You know, tiles melting like icicles off the ceilings.
I remember the desk area. I remember everything being black, burnt, black, sooty. And I remember the telephone being just a glob of black plastic sitting on the counter of the nurse's station.
There were no fire drills, no planned escapes. Everyone had to pitch in pitch black. Patients on the floor who could be discharged were. Those who could not had to be moved.
The hall was absolutely soot black.
It's hard to describe. Everything was black and gray. And if you can picture yourself with your color on, being in a black and white movie, that's exactly what it was, but it wasn't pleasant.
You could not see your hand in front of your face. So we formed a human chain and went down, and I knew the floor very well, as did the nurses that were working there. We went down through the black hall, and then we would enter a room. So we put wet towels over their heads and over our heads as we would bring them back through the hall. Now, as the emergency escalated, what was happening, we had to get everyone off the 9th floor and down onto the other floors. I can't tell you how many times I ran from the 9th floor to the lobby, to the 9th floor to the lobby, to the 9th floor to the lobby, because of course the elevators weren't working.
Outside, firefighters arrived in minutes, but there was a problem.
The firemen came and the ladders did not reach the 9th floor.
I still see that nurse screaming out of that treatment window, 1 floor above where the ladder was.
And they extended the ladder as high as it could go, almost vertical. And he was still a few feet short. And I understand he got to the tip of the ladder, the window was broken out, and now you're 100 feet in the air.
Frank Droney was one of the first firefighters on the scene.
And this friend of mine, Dick Jerry, he actually jumped from the top of the ladder to the window. And then he pulled his buddy in. They secured all the doors in there and made sure that people in the room stayed in the room and told them what to do. Wet towels, put them around the bottom of the door. But if it wasn't for the Dick, there would be a lot more people dead.
An absolutely heroic event, a heroic move on his part.
People are just soaking wet. Dirt and debris scattered throughout the halls. We had to work our way up a back stairway where firemen are washing cascading water down the stairways.
It defied instinct. Most people wanted to run, but opening doors and running away meant certain death. Those who survived stayed safe behind closed doors.
The doors in those days were swinging doors, which were not totally occlusive, so you had spaces beneath the doors. And I remember my nurses telling me later how they stripped the linen off the beds in those rooms, wet the linen down at the sinks, and piled the linen across the spaces along the doors.
A shut door means survival, plain and simple. The door's shut, you're going to survive. We learned a lot from this fire.
Mike Garrahy is the fire chief in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, and also fire marshal at Hartford Hospital. He comes from a long line of firefighters.
My grandfather was there. There's a picture of him in the hospital archives evacuating patients. He died when I was very young. I don't remember him telling us a whole lot about it, but I remember my grandmother telling me that this is one of the fires he came back from where he cried. And I remember that vividly.
50 years later, doors in hospitals now shut with what is called a positive latch, meaning it won't open unless someone deliberately opens it. Not the case in 1961. Rolling latches made it easier to enter a room.
The doors would open in. And all you had to do to get through that door was push on that door. Whether you pushed on it with a stretcher, pushed on it with your hand, or a cart, it didn't take much more than 5 or 7 pounds of pressure to overcome the roller latch and allow entry into the room. Now, if you think about it, with an inward opening door, pressure from a fire on the outside of that door, and only needing to increase 5, 7 pounds, whatever it was, it's not a big increment. And those doors were forced open, and that meant fire and smoke traveling.
Dr. David Crombie was on the pediatric floor that day, an intern at the hospital.
I remember that voice coming on the public address system. This is Dr. Wells Standish, president of the medical staff. We have suffered a tremendous tragedy this afternoon with a fire on the 9th floor. There has been loss of life.
His parents had heard a young physician had been killed.
So I remember calling home, and my mother picked up the phone and I identified myself, and there was a long pause. And then she realized that her son had not died in the fire. And she scolded me that I hadn't called earlier, you know. But the events of the day were absorbing.
It was his colleague, resident Norm Hedenstadt, who would not survive.
And it was a holy day of obligation. So he said to me, Eileen, are you going to Mass? We would go to St. Peter's. And I said, yes, I just want to get my medications charted, and as soon as, I give over the shift, I'll go to Mass too. So he then had left our floor in the minutes when the explosion from the trash chute. He had gone down in the elevator.
Hedenstedt was in the coffee shop when the fire broke out, and the coffee shop was in the place in JB1 where our mailroom is now. And for some reason, it was either he looked out the window and saw smoke on 9, or someone came into the coffee shop and said they're having a problem on 9. I don't know. But he exited the coffee shop and went to the elevators.
And he immediately came back up to help.
And he went up on the elevator to 9, thinking, my patients are there. There must be, if there's any tragedy there, I've got to look after it. And so I talked with nurses who got on the elevator in the lobby at the same time that he did. And when the elevator door opened on 9, they, meaning my nurse friends of that era, they were frantically pushing the buttons because there was evidence of smoke and fire out there on the 9th floor. And so they were frantically trying to get the elevator to go up to 10. And it did go up to 10. And when the door opened on 10 and they all got out, he wasn't there. So he got out on the 9th floor to somehow help his patients and see if he could deliver on his obligations. And he perished on the 9th floor.
They couldn't identify him but for his teeth and his ring.
There was an explosion in the trash chute. 9 dead. It appears to be at least 12 dead now here in the Hartford Hospital Fire. Dick O'Brien on the 9th floor at Hartford Hospital.
The investigation would eventually narrow in on the trash chutes and the confusion around them. Dry trash only, burnable waste, they read. Many thought that meant the chutes led directly to the incinerator in the basement. It wasn't uncommon for cigarettes or ash to get thrown down the chute. But the chutes led to a holding pile in the basement, not the incinerator. Chutes were never used in the hospital again. Many other hospitals followed suit.
There really were no laws pertaining to fire safety. There were standards, and a lot of these standards were voluntary. Now we've got a state fire code that requires words are in there are shall. You shall build the building with a sprinkler system.
Some changes were immediate, banning chutes, limiting smoking. Other changes came later.
We learned that we need sprinkler systems in patient buildings. It's difficult to evacuate a patient. We need to defend in place, and the best way to defend in place is with a total fire protection package, a sprinkler system. You're putting 60 gallons of water per minute in all the locations of the floor. So each sprinkler head's worth 60 gallons per minute. They're on the average about 15, 18 feet apart. We also learned that the one-piece fire door, the 8-foot fire door, was not practical, didn't allow exiting. It created a smoke compartment, but it created no way out.
Fire drills are now part of the culture, and fire escapes. 2 exits are now mandatory so people can get out. Wallpaper, ceiling tiles must be flame retardant.
We limit the combustibles. We put water on every floor. We close and latch patient doors. We create fire barriers. Dead-end corridors greater than 30 feet are no longer allowed.
Most of the changes were spearheaded by the physician who was also the hospital's chief executive officer, T. Stuart Hamilton. Decades before transparency was common practice, Hamilton believed in it. He went public with the disaster, inviting staff experts, even lawmakers, to see the devastation, to document it, all to make sure it would never happen again.
Within 24 hours of the event, T. Stuart Hamilton had every staff member in the hospital walk through that floor. It was still smoldering in essence. The stench of the fire was still present. The blackened walls, the dripping water from the ceilings, the wires hanging down. And I asked the staff members what the expectation that Dr. Hamilton had for walking them through the floor was, and they all said in different ways, he wanted us to see this tragedy, to understand it, and to recognize that this should never happen again. What T. Stuart Hamilton did that day, it was profound. Imagine how conflicted he must have been as a leader, to have this tragedy, this loss of life, this really unprecedented fire occur within the hospital, but at the same point in time, to recognize that the greater good that can come from that event was to bring attention, to assess the situation fully, and to create reforms that not only would benefit our hospital in Hartford, but in fact all hospitals across the country.
Those who survived will never forget that winter day. It's become part of who they are.
I think it changed me in many ways.
You keep wondering, could I have saved him? Yeah. You think about it for a while.
If it had a positive effect at all, it would be the changes that Hartford Hospital has made.
And the legacy of the 16 lives lost lives on in every fire escape, every sprinkler, every latch and fire retardant fiber in hospitals here and across the country.
It could be said that it could have been brought down by its own fire, but instead that fire was turned into a benefit for hospital construction nationwide.